If you had the chance to make a single wish knowing it could completely destroy your life, what would you ask for? That single question is what Obsession is really about. A horror movie that somehow turned a budget of just $750,000 into more than $100 million at the box office. And honestly, after watching it, I kind of understand why. Because Obsession is not really about monsters, ghosts, or jumpscares. It's about something much more uncomfortable. Getting exactly what you want. Even Steven Spielberg has said he loved the movie, which is about as close to a cinematic blessing as you can get.
But I have seen Obsession and I loved it.
But what stuck with me wasn't the success story behind the movie, it was the one wish willow. The idea that you can ask reality for the thing that you desired most, only to realize that your desire was a problem all along. And that got me thinking, what games explore that same nightmare? Not games with dark lighting and creepy monsters. Games where love, desire, guilt, fantasy, control, and self-deception become the horror. Games where the protagonist doesn't simply survive a nightmare, he helps create it. So if Obsession worked for you because of the one wish idea, the fantasy of getting exactly what you want, only to discover it was poisonous, here are 5 games you should play next. If what unsettled you about Obsession was the idea of love turning into possession, then Saiko no Sutoka takes the concept and removes every subtle layer from it. This is not a slow burn romance, this is not a tragic love story where obsession gradually eats someone alive. This is the nightmare version of that idea. In Saiko no Sutoka, you're trapped inside a school with Saiko, a girl who is completely obsessed with you, but her obsession does not feel romantic, it feels predatory. She stalks you, hunts you, toys with you, and treats your fear almost like part of the relationship. And that is exactly why it belongs in a list like this. Because Obsession plays with the fear of being loved too intensely, the fear of becoming someone's fixation. Saiko no Sutoka turns that fear into a survival horror game. The love is not comforting, it's not beautiful, it is a threat. What makes it interesting is that Saiko does not behave like a normal monster. She's not just a creature chasing you down a hallway, she feels emotionally unstable. Sometimes she acts playful, sometimes she acts affectionate, sometimes she becomes violent, and that unpredictability makes her scarier than a simple killer. It is the classic yandere fantasy taken to its most terrifying extreme, someone who says they love you but what they really want is control. So if Obsession made you uncomfortable because of its toxic romantic intensity, Saiko no Sutoka is the game that asks, what if the obsession was not metaphorical anymore? What if it was locked in a building with you? But if Saiko no Sutoka is the violent side of Obsession, then MiSide is the more seductive and psychological one. At first, MiSide looks completely harmless. It has that cute anime-inspired aesthetic, the colorful rooms and the cozy atmosphere, and the feeling that you're stepping into some kind of virtual girlfriend simulator. But that is exactly the trap, because the more time you spend with Mita, the more the game starts twisting that comfort into something deeply wrong. What begins as attention becomes control, what begins as confection becomes confinement, and what begins as a cute fantasy slowly becomes a prison. That is why MiSide fits so well in a video about games you might like if you enjoyed Obsession. Both the stories are built around the same dystopian question: when does love stop being love and become ownership? Mita does not simply want to be liked, she wants to keep you, she wants your attention, your presence, your time, and eventually your freedom. And the horror does not come from a monster appearing out of nowhere, it comes from realizing that the person who seems to love you the most might also be the person who refuses to let you leave. What makes MiSide especially effective is the contrast between its appearance and its actual meaning. Everything looks cute, bright, and playful, but underneath the surface, the game is about obsession, isolation, control, and emotional dependence. In that sense, MiSide feels closer to Obsession than many traditional horror games. It understands that romantic horror is not just about blood or jump scares. Sometimes the scariest thing is someone smiling at you and saying, "Stay with me forever." And that is why MiSide deserves a place on this list. Catherine Full Body is probably the strangest game on this list. It is stylish, weird, horny, funny, surreal, and sometimes completely ridiculous. But underneath all of that, it explores something that fits Obsession surprisingly well. What happens when desire gives you exactly the kind of fantasy you thought you wanted? The story follows Vincent, a man trapped between commitment and temptation. He has a long-term girlfriend, Catherine, with a K, who represents adult life, responsibility, and the pressure to grow up. Then he meets Catherine with a C, who represents fantasy, escape, sexual freedom, and the intoxicating feeling of being wanted without consequences. Of course, the consequences arrive immediately. Every night, Vincent is dragged into nightmares where men climb collapsing towers while being hunted by monstrous versions of their anxieties. During the day, he lies, drinks, avoids accountability, and tries to pretend the mess is somehow happening to him instead of because of him. That is where the obsession connection becomes obvious. This is a story about a man whose romantic and sexual desires mutate into psychological punishment. The important point is that Catherine with a C does not treat desire as cool or empowering. empowering by default. He treats it as unstable. Vincent wants comfort, sex, freedom, affection, and zero responsibility, which is basically the emotional logic of a wish gone wrong. He wants the fantasy version of love, but he cannot handle the human cost of actually being loved, needed, or confronted. That makes Catherine Full Body one of the best games to play after obsession. If what interested you was the male weakness at the center of the story. The horror is not just that a supernatural force exists. The horror is that the supernatural force knows exactly where Vincent is pathetic. Like obsession, it turns romantic immaturity into a trap. Doki Doki Literature Club is probably the most obvious pick if you want love turning into horror. At first, it looks like a harmless dating sim about joining a school literature club and getting close to cute anime girls. Then it slowly reveals that the entire romantic fantasy is rotting from the inside. The connection to obsession is not just girl becomes scary, that would be too shallow. The real connection is that both stories weaponize the fantasy of being loved absolutely. In Obsession, the wish creates a love that is not natural, not free, and not healthy, and in Doki Doki, Monica's love becomes terrifying because it is total. She doesn't want to be one possible romantic option. She wants to be the only reality left. That is what makes the game so effective. Obsession is the desire to delete everything that competes with you. Other people, other choices, other versions of the story. All of it becomes a threat. Monica's love is frightening because it is not satisfied with being loved. It needs to control the conditions under which love is possible. This is extremely close to the emotional horror of Obsession. Both stories ask, what happens when love is removed from consent? What happens when affection is manufactured, forced, scripted, or possessed? Doki Doki Literature Club is also useful for a video like this because it is accessible and recognizable. It is not a 200-hour RPG, it is a concentrated psychological trap. If Obsession left you thinking about how a cute romantic premise can suddenly become disgusting and suffocating, this is probably the fastest game on the list to give you that same feeling. Slay the Princess might sound like the weirdest recommendation here, but thematically it is one of the strongest. The whole game is about a relationship that changes depending on fear, desire, interpretation, violence, trust, and control. You are told there is a princess in a cabin that you must kill her because if you do not, the world will end. But the story refuses to stay that simple. The princess changes depending on how you see her and how you treat her. She can become vulnerable, monstrous, seductive, terrifying, tragic, divine, or impossible. The game is not just asking whether you should kill her, it is asking what a person becomes inside your imagination when you project fear and desire onto them. That is why it connects so beautifully with Obsession. In Obsession, the girl is not just a girl anymore after the wish, she becomes a distorted answer to Beer's fantasy. In Slay the Princess becomes a distorted answer to your perception. Both the stories are interested in the terrifying gap between a real person and the version of them created by someone else's need. This is one of the most important ideas in Obsession. You stop loving the person and start loving the image. You do not want them as they are, you want them as proof that you are special, wanted, chosen, forgiven, or powerful. Slay the Princess turns that psychological mechanism into an entire game. It is also probably the most replayable pick on the list because every route reveals another shade of the same central relationship. Sometimes the story feels romantic, sometimes it feels abusive, sometimes it feels cosmic, sometimes it feels like two people who cannot stop destroying and remaking each other. If Obsession made you interested in horror where romance, control, and identity collapse into each other, Slay the Princess is essential. That could be the ranking for today's video. If you liked it, please like and subscribe. And if you didn't like it, I want you to remember this quote by Marcus Aurelius: waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one. I have no clue why I said that, to be honest.